Welcome to the Integrated Schools Podcast. I'm Andrew, a white dad from Denver, and sadly, I'm coming to you today with some heartbreaking news. Courtney, my friend, my co-host, and the founder and the director of Integrated Schools, has died. She was struck by a car while standing on the sidewalk across the street from her house. She died instantly. The driver was sober and stayed at the scene, and it's being investigated as an accident. It would seem that this was a tragic fluke and one that has robbed the world of an incredible human. Courtney leaving behind a husband and two incredible kids who she loved deeply and was so very proud of. I met Courtney less than 2 years ago. I joined an Integrated Schools book club, and she suggested we connect on the phone afterwards, and I had an experience that I've come to learn was shared by nearly everyone who knew her. Our 20-minute call turned into 2 hours. She used to call it getting Pauletted after her mother, who apparently perfected the technique. Courtney was so easy to talk to, but without ever compromising her values. She didn't agree with you when you said something stupid, but she didn't push you away either. She heard you, she met you where you were, and then gently, or sometimes not so gently, nudged you towards a deeper, more helpful way of understanding. Even while you were getting called out, you just wanted to keep talking to her. She was simultaneously fiercely committed to her values, certain of the direction she was heading, while being constantly willing to learn, to grow, to understand differently, and then incorporate that new understanding into her worldview. She took this podcast incredibly seriously without taking herself too seriously. She regularly tried to convince me that what a certain part of an episode needed was her humming in the background. For everyone's sake, I will say it's good that I handled the audio editing, but she cared deeply about this podcast. She wouldn't sleep well before any episode came out. She just wanted to make sure that what we put out reflected our values, while acknowledging that if we had the same views in 3 months, we were doing something wrong. And I do mean our values. The longest conversation she and I had were trying to come to some shared understanding of what we were really trying to say and why. And while these were high-stakes conversations about deeply personal work, she never took it personally. We would disagree about something, and I would feel myself getting defensive. And instead of getting defensive herself, she would just dig deeper. She would try to really understand why I couldn't see it from her point of view. She'd say, okay, say that again some other way. No, try some different words. And she'd try to understand where I was coming from, and then she'd take a new approach to convincing me. And sometimes she did. Occasionally I won her over, but we always ended up in a place that we were both comfortable with. And then she would refuse to go back and listen to past episodes. I think because she knew that if we were to do it all over again, we would land on some different phrasing, some different understanding that reflected all we had learned since we had put out that episode. This somewhat rambling account of just some of what made her special is about all I can muster at the moment. And she'd probably be mad that I was doing an entire episode just about her anyway. But suffice to say, I'm not alone in feeling this loss. As news spread on social media, the comments came flowing in. And the number of people whose lives she touched, who felt that personal connection to her, who made braver choices and made them better because of her work, is overwhelming. And while that impact is more than many dare to dream to achieve in their lives, the tragedy of all of this is the untapped potential, all of the work that she'll never get to do. However, she's built something beautiful, something powerful, and something enduring, a community of people engaged in the work of building a true multiracial democracy, a step towards finding our 3.5%. And while I have no idea how we will go on without her, how I will go on without her, what I am sure of is that Integrated Schools will continue. This podcast will continue. The chapters around the country and around the world will go on. The workbook for integrating parents, the workshops, the Facebook group, it will continue. And while the thought of never getting Pauletted again is a bit more than I can bear, and while the idea of releasing this episode without her signing off on it is terrifying, we will continue. We will keep sharing stories. We'll keep finding experts to push our thinking. We'll keep trying to know better and do better because Courtney wouldn't have tolerated it any other way. Thank you, listeners. The reach of this podcast brought her joy and pride, and your feedback warmed her heart. If you'd like to share a voice memo of what this podcast or Courtney's work has meant to you, please send it to hello@integratedschools.org. We'll be using some for a future, hopefully more thoughtful and less tear-filled episode, and we'll be sharing them with her family. Please stay tuned to this feed, to integratedschools.org, Integrated Schools on social media. We need a bit of time to regroup, but we aren't going anywhere. Details about services will be shared as soon as they're confirmed. But for today, I'll leave you with this.
This work, the work that you and I are doing here, the work that all of the volunteers that support integrated schools as an organization, the chapter leaders like Darcy and Lisa and Trevor, who are working in their cities, even if it's just in small ways, it's ultimately optimistic. It's ultimately hopeful. I actually do believe that we have enough white and or privileged families who are willing to dig in deeply and rewrite who we want to be in America and rewrite that for our children.
I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to be in this with Courtney as we tried to know better and do better. See you next time.